This week in Idaho, Idaho's recently passed immigration law is halted in a federal showdown. A special needs teen ends up in critical condition after police shooting. Also, Idaho outlaws university DEI programs with new legislation. And Trump opens up Idaho's forests to logging expansion. This is the Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Glad to have you here with us today. I hope you had a wonderful week. Spring is upon us. If you haven't noticed it with all the warm weather, I was up in Stanley last week, and even up there with 6 feet of snow, it was warm, and I was like, I don't even need my coat at all. So the state is definitely warming up. Hopefully it's not another one of our fake springs. For those that have lived any amount of time here in Idaho, you will probably know what I'm talking about, where Idaho gets nice and warm and enjoyable, and then we get one more frost before we can have the wonderful release of summer. But in any case, I'm going to take it while I have it. Hopefully I can get some more hikes in and you can enjoy it as well. Another thing that is very enjoyable is that the legislative session has ended. Very happy about that. It's a nice break for all of us in the news system. But this, especially with this week's episode, that doesn't mean that the news hasn't been rolling. There's a lot of different things that have been going on, a lot of different effects coming off the legislative session, but just other stuff in general. The news has not slept at all. And getting into it a little bit more, in an Idaho courthouse this last week, Judge Amanda Brailsford temporarily extended a block on Idaho's controversial immigration law, specifically halting the enforcement of new state crimes for illegal entry and illegal re-entry. ACLU attorney Hannah Steinberg argued that the state had overstepped its bounds, declaring, "Idaho can't unilaterally enforce immigration law without federal supervision," end quote. She contended the law was unconstitutionally vague, providing no clear definition for what constitutes illegal entry between states. James Craig from the Idaho Attorney General's office countered that plaintiffs lack standing, arguing that they were, quote, in knowing violation of federal immigration law and are simply asking the court to avoid the consequences, end quote. He maintained that unlike Texas law, Idaho's version did not authorize state courts to order deportations. Judge Brailsford questioned both sides. Quote, I understand there are lots of folks on pins and needles awaiting a decision, end quote, she acknowledged. Her temporary restraining order would remain until she could issue a written decision on a long-term preliminary injunction. Meanwhile, an estimated 40,000 illegal residents currently reside in Idaho pending this judicial interpretation. It'll be very fascinating here, and I know there is some great frustration with the court system at the moment. And now switching over to eastern Idaho, which, has some connections with illegal immigrants, but we're not going to touch on that specifically. Victor Perez, a 17-year-old with cerebral palsy and a mental handicap that made him primarily nonverbal, was shot multiple times by 4 Pocatello police officers on April 5th of this year. The Puerto Rico teenager, whose family speaks limited English, was holding a kitchen knife in the yard when police arrived. According to a witness who recorded the incident, Perez appeared to be in a confrontation with family members when the police were called. And the witness described the situation as not immediately dangerous, stating, nobody was in immediate danger, end quote. When officers arrived, they positioned themselves outside the fence and ordered Perez to drop the knife. When he stood and moved toward them while still armed, officers opened fire. The shooting resulted in doctors removing 9 bullets from Perez's body and amputation of his left leg. As of April 8th, he remains in critical condition at the Portneuf Medical Center. Pocatello Police Chief Raj Shea defended the officers' action during a press conference, stating they had to make a split-second decision when faced with, quote, an armed, non-compliant individual, end quote. The incident is under investigation by the Eastern Idaho Critical Incident Task Force. And then coming back to Boise and a little bit into politics, Idaho Governor Brad Little has signed Senate Bill 1198 into law on April 4th, effectively banning diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs, at all state colleges and universities in Idaho. The legislation passed with strong support in both chambers, receiving 27 in favor, 8 against vote in the Senate, and 52 in favor, 17 against in the House. The new law prohibits Idaho's higher education institutions from maintaining DEI offices, requiring diversity training, or establishing bias reporting systems. It specifically targets programs derived from, quote, critical race theory, including concepts like structural equality, systematic oppression, social justice, institutional racism, and patriarchy. Under the law, colleges are barred from establishing curricula that require students to complete DEI-related courses to their degree programs, with exemptions only for programs specifically focused on racial, ethnic, or gender studies. All institutions must submit annual reports confirming their compliance with the law. Idaho now joins with this law a growing list of Republican states, including Florida, Texas, and North Dakota, didn't know North Dakota had that have enacted similar restrictions on diversity initiatives in public university systems. The law is now set to take effect on July 1st of this year, so it'll be interesting to see what the colleges do with that. And speaking of an administration that is against DEI and many other things, the Trump administration recently rolled back overreaching environmental protections on more than half of the U.S. national forests. Announced on April 4th of this year by the Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins, aims to expedite logging projects across 176,000 square miles of federal lands, an area, to put it in perspective, larger than California. For Idaho, this policy shift holds particular significance. Northern Idaho forests are prominently featured on the administration's map of lands now open to accelerated logging, with vast swaths marked for streamlined timber production. The directive calls for a 25% increase in timber harvesting over the next 4 to 5 years, while bypassing traditional environmental reviews that were gumming it up there a little bit. Governor Little has enthusiastically embraced the federal initiative. On March 3rd, he directed state agencies to align with Trump's Free Our Forest executive order, positioning Idaho to take full advantage of the new policy. Quote, the Trump administration is enacting common sense forest management policy changes that reflect Idaho values, Little said. With, quote, a refreshing perspective at the Forest Service, Idaho stands ready to help transform how our federal lands and fire management lead to invigorated rural communities. Idaho's existing leadership in implementing the Good Neighbor Authority program, which facilitates state-federal partnerships in forest management, positions us to quickly capitalize on this new directive. Our state's forestry sector may see significant expansion as the environmental objection processes are bypassed and categorically exclusions from environmental analysis are broadened. Environmental groups have voiced strong opposition, as you would expect, arguing the policy prioritizes timber industry profits over ecological concerns. Quote, this isn't about helping the timber industry, said Blaine Miller McFeely, hopefully I got that last name right, of the Earth Justice. Quote, it's not looking at what will protect communities, end quote. But meanwhile, logging advocates like Scott Dane of the American Logging Council praised the move, claiming it will improve forest health while creating rural jobs, something to be expected there. With 2 Idahoans recently appointed to the key positions in the USDA, Mike Brown under the Secretary of Natural Resources and Tom Schultz at the Forest Chief Service, Idaho's influence on national forest policy appears poised to grow along with our timber production. Hey there, if you've enjoyed the Midweek Report so far, do us a favor and hit the like and subscribe/follow button so you get all the future Midweek Reports. That helps us stay connected with you and reach more folks who love Idaho just like you. And speaking of conflict, we have plenty of that, but in Boise specifically, there is a bit of a one there brewing in Idaho's biggest city between faith, law, and governance. Despite Governor Little's recently signing House Bill 96, explicitly prohibiting government entities from flying any other flag other than officially sanctioned flags, Boise's mayor has, in defiance, continued to fly the pride flag below the City of Boise flag at City Hall. For many conservatives and Christians, this blatant disregard of the newly established state law represents a troubling precedent. The mayor's decision not only challenges legal authority, but appears to elevate one group's political identity above the rule of law that governs all citizens. When questioned about their non-compliance, city officials stated they would, quote, continue to fly the existing flag on city property, refusing further explanation. Some residents support this defiance, calling it resistance to ridiculous laws. Many Idahoans see it differently. that it isn't about denying anyone's humanity, but rather it's about the will of the legislature and the banners we are united under. If we say we're united under our pride or sexuality or orientation, or if one of our state and our national identity founded in our Constitution here in Idaho and our national U.S. Constitution. And very much related to the story that we just talked about, and another bill signed, and probably connect into this later on this year, on April 4th, Governor Brad Little signed Idaho House Bill 6 into law, empowering the Attorney General, Rao Labrador currently, to investigate and prosecute city officials for wrongdoing. This legislation, championed by Representative Chris Bruce and Senator Ben Taze, aims to ensure impartial investigation when local prosecutors face conflicts of interest. The bill initially faced resistance in the Senate over concerns about potential overreach by the Attorney General. However, it was revised with key amendments clarifying that the AG does not have exclusive jurisdiction, and local prosecutors can still refer cases to neighboring counties when conflicts arise. Senate Pro Temp Kelly Anton praised the collaborative effort, noting the importance of maintaining public confidence in local governance while respecting the authority of elected officials. The law represents a step towards transparency and accountability in Idaho's local governments, allowing citizens to seek justice without fear of local political bias. And staying on the train of bills signed, Governor Little has signed a law ending publicly funded medical care for illegal immigrants, effective July 1st of this year. The new legislation eliminated various public benefits for those unlawfully in the U.S., including communicable disease testing, prenatal care, crisis counseling, and certain food assistance for children. While emergency services remain available regardless of legal status, preventative care like vaccinations would no longer be state funded. For some people, we might see that as a compassionate benefit, but we're not getting into that right now. At the Community Health Center, Dr. Rodriguez explained to his staff, quote, "We'll continue serving everyone, but funding resources may change." And speaking of DEI and schools, Idaho schools face a choice as they await guidance on the Trump administration's recent directive to cease diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs or risk losing federal funding. The U.S. Department of Education has given states and schools 10 days to sign a certificate against DEI initiatives, tying compliance to continued federal support. For districts like CUNA, and coming more locally, which take in about $5.9 million in federal funds, roughly 10% of their total budget, the potential loss could impact programs such as school meals, special education, and career technical education. The Idaho State Board of Education is working with the Idaho Department of Education to provide guidance to school districts and charter schools on how to comply with the new requirement. However, Idaho has received a 10-day extension, not quite sure why, giving schools until April 24th to sign and return the certification. But zooming out a little bit more nationally, this directive is part of a broader effort by the Trump administration to eliminate illegal DEI practices in schools. The Department of Education says that certain DEI programs violate Title VI of the Civil Rights Act by discriminating based on race. Idaho educators now face a choice with this policy. Either comply by removing DEI from their schools or lose the federal funding that many of them rely on. This coming week will be insightful as schools await state guidance and make decisions about their DEI programs and finances. Hey there, have you not heard of any of these stories before or found value in this episode? Please don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family so they can hear about it and be well informed about what's going on in the state that we all love so dearly. And staying with universities, Michael Leggett, a University of Idaho junior, never expected that a Trump train flag hanging in his apartment would lead to his eviction. The bright blue banner featured a cartoon train was a joke gift from his mother, but his landlord didn't find it amusing at all. When Leggett and his roommates attempted to renew their lease this spring, they received a surprising email from their landlords. Quote, "Unfortunately, we have decided not to renew your lease. While fixing the lock over the holiday break, we noticed the Trump flag on the wall. Respectfully, we are being more selective in choosing tenants that better align in our values." End quote. The flag was never visible from the outside, hanging on their main mantle area alongside other decorations, including a Mexican flag belonging to their roommate and various beer flags. Leggett emphasized that they were model tenants with no prior issues. Quote, "We love staying here. We had no complaints. We never paid rent late." End quote. Curiously, the rental application also included some unusual questions about the Earth's age, its shape, and beliefs about stopping airborne viruses. Kind of odd there. Questions Leggett felt that were, quote, specifically directed towards a religion type of thing, end quote. Despite the seemingly unfair situation, lawyer Brian Festa of the We Patriots of USA confirmed that political views aren't protected under Idaho housing law. Quote, "Currently, federal and state law does not prohibit a landlord or business from discriminating on the basis of political viewpoint," Festa explained. Quote, "So unfortunately, there's no lawsuit here," end quote. And stepping over to an institution that usually is quite loud in its political beliefs, but is getting a little bit more quiet, the Micron Technologies, a Boise-based semiconductor giant, appears to be making a calculated move regarding its corporate messaging. Once very vocal about its diversity, equality, and inclusion initiatives, the company has noticeably shifted its approach in 2024, quietly rebranding its diversity, equity, and inclusion section to, quote, "global culture and workforce," end quote, on its website. The strategic silence comes at an important juncture for Micron. With billions in the CHIPS Act funding at stake, a new administration potentially reconsidering the program's future, Micron seems to be reading the political winds carefully. President Trump's February statement to Congress that lawmakers should, quote, "get rid of the CHIPS Act," end quote, signals potential changes to how semiconductor manufacturing will be supported in America, maybe through a more private direction. Micron's decision to remain silent on DEI this year, breaking with its annual tradition of releasing a What Makes Us Micron report. While other large U.S. companies like McDonald's, Ford, and Walmart have publicly announced the end of their DEI initiatives, Micron has chose a little bit of a different approach, neither confirming or denying changes to existing policies. For conservatives, this represents a welcome return to business fundamentals. Rather than focusing on social initiative, Micron appears to be hiding or prioritizing its core mission of semiconductor manufacturing and substantially investing in Boise, New York, and Virginia. With $6.2 billion in the CHIPS Act funding already awarded and construction milestones being reached, the company has significant economic interest to protect. Basically, they want to be careful not to make Trump mad at them. These subtle website changes, replacing identity-focused messaging with broader global culture terminology, suggest that Micron may be changing based on political winds, where merit and performance may once again take precedent over identity-based initiatives. And speaking of the left and protests, in Idaho cities this last week, they witnessed hands-off protests as part of a national movement against the Trump administration. With local media reports impressive turnouts, with Boise having reports of about 1,500, in Pocatello 1,000, and Idaho Falls 500, and nearly 800 in Sandpoint. Questions have emerged, however, about the authenticity of these demonstrations in a very traditionally conservative state here in Idaho. Investigations revealed that organizations like Idaho 50501, Invisible, and the League of Women Voters coordinated these events with significant out-of-state backing. Sources confirmed that many protesters were transported from neighboring states to inflate attendance numbers in Idaho's rural communities, particularly up there in Sandpoint. Quote, "It's suspicious that so many people suddenly appeared in our small towns," noted one local observer. Quote, "Idaho is deep red, yet these protests try to create the illusion of massive local opposition," end quote. The demonstrations featured professionally printed signs and coordinated messaging across all locations, possibly suggesting a centralized planning rather than a more grassroots sentiment of people just being frustrated. While genuine local concerns do exist, and we're not saying they don't, Boise being an example, the scale and uniformity of protests point to a possible external influence attempting to manufacture dissent in states like Idaho, where Trump support really is actually stronger than what the media wants to portray. And speaking of DC, our Idaho Congressman Mike Simpson has joined a bipartisan effort to protect Idaho's public lands from potential sale or transfer. The Public Lands in Public Hands Act, they love to get it nice and rhymey, co-sponsored by Simpson, would block the sale of the most federal-owned lands managed by the Department of the Interior and the U.S. Forest Service, while requiring congressional approval for any exemptions. Quote, Idaho's abundance of parks, forests, and public lands make our state a wonderful place to live, work, and play, Simpson said. The legislation comes at a time when some congressional Republicans have suggested selling public lands to address budget concerns. Conservation groups applauded Simpson's decision, as expected, noting that public lands generate an estimated $7.9 billion annually for Idaho's economy. Quote, we're really thankful for Representative Simpson listening to his constituents, end quote, said Ryan McGoldrick of the Conservation Voters for Idaho, adding that public lands serve as a united factor in politically divided times. Which, hey there, if you've gotten to this point in the report, you probably love learning about stuff in Idaho and enjoy the midweek report. So please consider subscribing or follow us depending on what platform you're listening to so you don't miss any of our future content. Plus, check out our Substack that's going to continue to grow with more news articles and written content that will probably be coming out a little bit quicker than the midweek report generally does. And speaking of another thing that has caused some protests, but related to Idaho here, Idaho's DOGE, the Idaho Department of Government Efficiency, was born from the ashes of House Bill 364. The bill that failed in session and is inspired by President Trump's federal initiative led by Elon Musk sadly died when the session adjourned this last week or two, but on April 11th, Republican leaders refused to let the idea perish, and Representative Jaron Crane in a press release announced the formation of the task force. Quote, since 1974, there has been no reconstruction of Idaho's government, Crane declared. The DOGE task force has a three-pronged mission: consolidate redundant agencies, reduce state-funded travel, and eliminate unnecessary positions. It envisions an efficiency in Idaho that hasn't been reorganized since Governor Cecil Andrews' time. Speaker Mike Moyle called it, quote, a significant move towards streamlining government operations, end quote. The task force is now preparing for public meetings, though the date of their first gathering remains yet to be determined. And speaking of things at the State House, and also going back to Congress, Idaho Secretary of State Phil McGrane urged the U.S. Congress to invest in federal election databases to help states verify voter eligibility during a subcommittee on election hearings in Washington, D.C. Phil McGrane emphasized the need for better tools to ensure accurate voter rolls, highlighting the challenges faced when comparing state voter data with federal databases. He discussed Idaho's effort to prevent non-citizens from voting, including an executive order signed by Governor Little and a state constitutional amendment approved by voters. McGrane also addressed questions about the effectiveness of these measures and the potential impact on citizens' voter rights. The hearing focused on election integrity, with Secretary of States from other states also participating and facing questions about their voter roll maintenance and efforts to protect citizens' rights to vote. And staying in D.C. just a little bit longer, President Trump has nominated Bart Davis to return as U.S. Attorney to the District of Idaho, a position he previously held during Trump's first administration. The White House announced the nomination on April 1st. He expressed his honor at the opportunity to serve again. Quote, it's an honor, it certainly is, Davis said. I really enjoyed my service as the U.S. Attorney and has a remarkable U.S. Attorney's office, end quote. Davis, 70, brings extensive experience to the role. Before his first stint as the U.S. Attorney from 2017 to 2021, he served nearly 2 decades in the Idaho Senate, including over a decade as Senate Majority Leader. He holds degrees from Brigham Young University and the University of Idaho College of Law. In February of 2021, Davis resigned at the request of the Biden administration, as is common with administrative changes. Josh Hurwitz, Biden's appointee, ended his service in February of this year, with Justin D. Watcott currently serving as acting U.S. Attorney. If confirmed by the Senate, Davis would serve a 4-year term with an annual salary of about $191,800. Not bad pay. His nomination is currently pending before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Davis praised his staff as, quote, a pleasure to work with, and highlighted the effective relationships with law enforcement partners. Quote, it's going to be quite a privilege to go back and work with those people, he added. And coming to our last story, Blue Cross of Idaho is laying off 100 employees following the termination of its decade-long contract with the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. The state agency opted to award contracts for its Medicare and Medicaid dual eligibility program to two out-of-state for-profit insurers, United Healthcare and Molina Healthcare, citing potential savings of up to $40 million. The nonprofit health insurer, Blue Cross, plans to lay off approximately 135 employees between June and October, affecting workers in Meridian and other offices throughout the state. The contract, officially set to expire at the end of year, will now terminate in June, accelerating job loss. Meridian Mayor Robert Simmons expressed disappointment, noting it was, quote, unfortunate that due to decisions by the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare to award contracts to an out-of-state insurer, more than 100 Idaho jobs that served fellow Idahoans with significant medical needs are now being eliminated. And speaking of leaving, I have to hit the road here, especially with spring fever. I need to get out and get hiking. So thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you like the midweek report, make sure to check out our other content, particularly on our Substack. We continue to grow and work on that. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting us at @LocalYokel_Idaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now. I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.